Far east of the Sword Coast, the Shadowvar and Discoverin have fallen. The Shadow Storm is no more. Sembia is fractured into city-states. A mysterious hero rises from the ashes to usher in a new era of prosperity. Yet there is still suffering. Cormyr and the wild elves of the Dalelands offer war on all sides. Earth motes, madness, and shadow dragons plague the lands. These are the tales of the heroes who ended that suffering. 1491 DR, the year of Sembian revival.
Welcome everybody to another episode of The Long-Winded One. With me tonight I have a friend of mine named Steve. He plays the character Jendal. And tonight we're going to get to know Jendal a little bit. We're going to get to know Steve a little bit. And, this has been a long time coming. We did interviews of some of the other players, some of the other characters early on in this 50 episode run of the Sembian revival. And it's been a long time. So it's time for Jendal. And, Jendal was a late addition to the campaign, but in some ways he's become, if not the most central character, one of the most central characters in the heart and soul of the party. So let me just say, welcome to the podcast, Steve.
Hey, thanks, Jared.
So let's get to know you a little bit. Tell us about your history playing Dungeons and Dragons and sort of what brought you to the campaign.
Sure. Actually, my first Dungeons and Dragons experience that was legit was probably back in, was it 2012 or 2013 when we started trying with Thrak back in the day. And you were a part of that. That was really fun. And ever since then, it's been kind of on and off. Like I'll do a campaign every once in a while and then sometimes step away to work on other things. But it's always been a fun experience. And really the inspiration behind Jendal was I wanted to play a monk. I listened to this D&D podcast called Critical Role. And there was a monk like NPC character in it and had some really awesome abilities. And I was like, I wanted to check that out. So, but then there's the other side of him, which is the whole thing with Lady Tamora and like the luck aspect of things and kind of choosing to do things randomly. That was really interesting to me. So. Yeah.
And so you joined the campaign actually right as the podcast was legit. We were true to the story. Jendal joined us in Battle Rise. So what was that like joining a campaign that had already started? Did you feel like you had a good lay of the land?
It was interesting because it was coming in a little bit as an outsider at first. Like everybody had, those bonds with each other, and we had some work to do to sort of catch up and build the bonds with the other characters. But it was kind of fun, actually, to some extent, to be kind of an outsider looking in at the start and then gradually, build those friendships with the other characters.
Yeah. So coming into this, you mentioned we had played this campaign, this kind of homebrew campaign in 4th edition called Trine, and we even tried to play like a second version of that. I think that was back in 2013. And then you and I had a Star Wars, kind of another homebrew Star Wars campaign. That was, I wouldn't say that was D20 at all. That was all kind of like text-based role-playing. That became like, my brother led that campaign, and it became like one of the most fun role-playing games I think I've ever played. You want to tell the listeners a little bit about that?
Oh yeah. I was really into that too. And we, I think you and I were both so invested in the story that we like kept like pushing your brother to like finish it. So like years later, I remember we like finished the story because we like both just wanted the closure.
Yeah.
No, it was great. I played a Jedi knight. You played a Sith called Jendal, which is actually kind of funny because that's like close to Jendal.
Yeah, it's true. And it was before Rogue One, so the character Jen, I think the character's name was Jen in Rogue One. that name reminded me a lot of my character's name. And in fact, my character we were both kind of like both sides of like the gray Jedi, right? Like, so,
Mm.
your character was like this Jedi through and through, a Jedi, but like wasn't afraid to like bend the rules to do what he thought was right. And my guy was like a pure blood Sith who had been a slave his whole life, slave of the Sith, had these gifts, the Force gifts, and like basically had this real kind of dark ethos, like belief system where he'd probably murder a lot of people, but he would do it for what a lot of people would argue is like, like, oh, well, that was, yeah, I guess he had a good reason for that, but I don't know if I would have handled it the same way.
Mm.
And yeah, so we both played this like both sides of the gray line, I think. Wouldn't you describe it like that?
Yeah, and yeah, to add to that too, I think my character, it was Morrow. Now I just remembered the name. He like the Jedi philosophy is a little weird because it's to some extent you could interpret it as like kind of repress your emotions, and like don't express like anything. And the Sith are kind of like an opposite extreme in some respects. So I guess like Morrow was like, what's up with that? That's like a little weird. Like, why are we like kind of holding back and repressing all emotion? It doesn't seem like a healthy way to live, kind of deal.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and before the whole last three, well, at least before the Rise of Skywalker, my character, and I thought this was pretty forward thinking. I argued a lot with my brother about the nature of the Force, but like how he would use dark side powers, or what would be considered a dark side power, for good. Like I remember he used his own life force to heal somebody else. Like he essentially force drained himself to give the energy to someone else. And this was before, of course, Rey does it to that worm creature in Rise of, or whichever movie that was. We're going to have all kinds of Star Wars hate from this episode, by the way. But anyway, we're digressing. But so anyway, we've played in, since going back to about 2013, we've played it in several different campaigns together, some of which you've led, some of which I've led. But let's get back to Sembia. Coming into Sembia and Forgotten Realms, what was your sort of knowledge base for Faerun?
honestly, like at the start, not a lot, but your campaigns are always like, you go into the history and like learn, all the stuff about like the region and actually like individual like towns and stuff to a pretty high level of detail. So just, through experiencing it through the campaign primarily was sort of my learning experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, most people kind of grew up playing video games that took place in Forgotten Realms, or maybe they've read a novel or something, or if you have played a campaign, it's probably on the Sword Coast. But as we've covered in this before, one of the reasons Sembia stuck out to me as a great place to run a campaign is because it was so wide open. And so, it was palatable. You could learn what history there was and sort of roll your story in. Although I'm learning from Mr. Greenwood on Twitter, as the story goes on, like, oh geez, this little fact, this little shrine that I formed so much of the story around, Yevon Shrine, really has quite a bit of history. And I don't know why I doubted that. It's Ed Greenwood. But like, so we've kind of pivoted in the last few episodes, to like get more in line with Ed's true vision. And it's occurred to me since then that like other little facts, like, why is Coral's Well called Coral's Well? Like, is it really named after this eccentric guy druid named Coral? Probably not. So, I did my best to stay true, like you said, to the history. But it has occurred to me that I made some major sins of omission, and took some liberties that I probably shouldn't have, in terms of like being a legit Forgotten Realms story that can weave into the timeline. But another question for you, if you don't mind. So we're at the point in the podcast now where we've changed enough in sort of the audible version of the podcast from compared to the campaign that like at this point in the story, week to week, you don't really know what's going to happen on the script. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So especially now, like you said, it's sort of diverged away a little bit from the campaign. Some things have definitely changed from the first go around. So at this point, pretty much anything could happen. So
But to that end, could you tell us maybe a little bit about the differences in Jendal, like in terms of how your original creation and the way he sort of is portrayed in the podcast is different? Anything to do with his backstory or personality, anything like that?
I think in the podcast, he's definitely become a lot more enriched in terms of the background story. There was the episode you wrote about, his childhood and his adopted family. And that really, I feel like added a lot of depth to his character. And yeah, I think he was just like a little bit more happy-go-lucky in the campaign and a little bit less like caring about stuff. I think you remember the one session in the campaign we had like those. You remember in Drought when we were with like the halfling dude? What was his name again?
Oh yeah. Oh man, you asked me too quick. He had the big, great sword, Cecil.
Yeah, Cecil. So like, basically, there was this scenario in the campaign originally where we made a deal with the village of Drought to help capture a black dragon, and the black dragon essentially burned down like half of Drought and like killed most of the people there. And at that point, we were like, okay, we just need to kill this black dragon. So the party killed the black dragon, and then Cecil was like, "What are you doing? You broke the deal," and like starting to kind of get aggressive with us. And I remember I literally flipped a coin to see whether or not to just attack him, and then, like attacked him based on that. So.
Yeah. He was you played the character very true to his original creation, which is like he is a true free spirit, right? Like he just lets the will of Timora, right, sort of guide him.
Absolutely.
Or what he thinks the will of Timora is, right? So I'm curious to see what you think about the possible future, right? So this episode is going to air right after Matoa sacrifices himself in Sakors, and you guys end up in Yaun, and you're looking up at the top of the hill, and Siren is like, "We're here for the whole of Yaun. We're here because there is another one of Thera's dragons down in the hole, and we're gonna settle the score, so to speak." But I'm curious to see where you think maybe the future leads Jendal.
It's an interesting direction that the party's going in. If I had to guess, I'd say these violent means have violent ends, and there's probably going to be repercussions for sort of seeking vengeance against this dragon and this powerful entity. So, I was really sad to see Matoa go, but wouldn't be surprised if somebody else kind of bit it as a result of this decision. So we'll just have to see.
All right, buddy. Well, I'll see you probably next week when we record. And thanks for giving a little insight onto Jendal.
All right, great. Thanks, Jared.
Though this marks the end of the episode, the tale continues within a 10-day. Join us at longwinded.one and consider giving us a review on Apple Music, Spotify, or really whichever platform you choose.